Welcome to today's event, March Towards Armageddon, Christian Zionism from Reformation to Apocalypse, with Yahav of the Green Olive Collective. My name is Erez Bleicher, and I'm the Advocacy and Membership Director of the Green Olive Collective, an advocacy, human rights, and tour guiding center committed to a democratic future and the end of the ongoing displacement of Palestinians. We provide communities around the world with insight into the apartheid policies of the occupation and the resources to engage in meaningful advocacy in solidarity with Palestinians. Your contributions for today's event will support our urgent work to challenge policies of forced transfer, displacement, and military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We need contributions from you, our wider community, in order to sustain grassroots initiatives with Palestinian communities on the ground, including the replanting of olive trees after arson attacks by settlers, rebuilding homes after demolitions, and cultivating lands threatened with expropriation. You can contribute at giftjustice.com, which I'll put into the chat now. Today, we'll be discussing the British Christian origins of Zionism and investigate the critical role evangelical Christianity has played in the history of the State of Israel. We'll connect the dots between theology, politics, and the realities on the ground, and build a better understanding of the ways Christian Zionism functions as a contemporary linchpin of the ongoing Nakba and of current geopolitical support for the occupation. This event is part of our broader Sowing Solidarity campaign to counter the Christian Zionist organization Hayovel and their Greening Israel project by replanting Palestinian olive trees instead of settler forests and rehabilitating olive groves destroyed in settler attacks. Over 1,000 olive, fig, and citrus trees have already been planted as part of this campaign. I'm very glad to share, and hundreds more will be planted by the end of this month in villages throughout the Nablus district, Masafer Yatta, and the Kilkilia governorate. We're very proud to partner with the Borean Land and Farming Cooperative in this initiative, and are very glad now to be joined by Yahav, who is here today and will continue with us as part of our ongoing series exploring Christian Zionism and its central role in the ongoing dispossession of Palestinians. Yahav is a researcher, political commentator, tour guide, and senior partner with the Green Olive Collective. He has guided tours in Jerusalem for over a decade while educating communities from around the world on the policies of displacement, surveillance, and policing deployed against Palestinian communities living under occupation. And over the last 2 years, he has also, I know, been researching Christian Zionism and the political and theological roots of the reality we see today. So thanks, Yahav, really, for being here and sharing your findings and insights. The last thing I'll say before I'll pass it to you is just that from this moment on, as Yahav shares, people should feel free to send questions in the chat. Just write the word question at the beginning, followed by a dash or colon, so I can look out for it in the comments. And hopefully we'll have time at the end to open the conversation for a larger Q&A, question and answer, and integrate some of your questions at the end of today's event. So with that, thanks again, Yahav. And are you able to unmute?
All right. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So thank you, Erez. Welcome all. What I'm going to try to do today is a little bit like, I don't know if any of you, I know some of you have been on our Green Olive tours, and often we'll try to start with a briefing, which is telling 100 years of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in 40 minutes or so. This is a very ambitious kind of thing. Here I'm talking about hundreds of years. It's prone to oversimplification. It's prone to, well, it's a tricky thing to do. And I'm going to try to keep it kind of simple. And I'm going to try to start from the end, go back to the beginning, explain why I'm doing this. So I grew up in Israel as a Jew. I guess as a Zionist, I mean, that was my schooling, that was my atmosphere, that was my family. My grandparents came to this country as Zionists, following a Jewish dream. And having been through the Israeli school system, I can tell you what also Wikipedia can tell you, that Zionism, the political movement to make a Jewish state in the land of Israel, began among Jews in the late 19th century and was formalized in 1897 by Theodor Herzl, founding the Zionist movement. And today it's supported by many people around the world in various ways, right? We have such a thing. I didn't get this in school, but generally, we're as Christian Zionists, evangelical Christians who support the state of Israel, who see it as fulfilling prophecy. But certainly, my understanding was, as I think probably it is for most of you, that Zionism is a Jewish movement which has some support from Christians. And as Erez nicely hinted, I've recently fallen into a sort of rabbit hole of going back and back and back and back. And I've come to formulate a different understanding, an alternative understanding, which I'm going to try to present to you today, which is actually Zionism as a political movement to make a Jewish state in the land of Israel is first and foremost an evangelical Protestant Christian project, which started long, long before Herzl was formulated and organized, particularly British. It's a British evangelical Protestant project that Jews were sort of roped into, pulled into, with all sorts of promises and perhaps with some subterfuge. And how this happened and where this has led us today is what I'm going to try to tell you. And I'm going to go back. All right. Christian Zionism, evangelical Zionism, is based on, they will all tell you, the Bible, reading the Bible. What I'm going to propose, I don't want to offend anybody, but the Bible by itself, straight up, is a very, very dangerous text, read simply in today's world. Okay, there's many beautiful things in the Bible, but it is an Iron Age, kingdom-based, priest-based, national story that if you just believe, as many evangelicals seem to, that you need to take it literally in today's world, leads to all sorts of, let's just say, dangerous conclusions and actions. And so why does Christian Zionism not begin with, or why does Zionism not begin with the Bible, or why does Christian Zionism not begin with the apostles? Well, very, very basically, the thing that I just said about the Bible in itself being a dangerous thing, I think was very, very well understood by the Jewish rabbis and by the Christian churches. And so a huge amount of work was done, the church traditions, the Talmud, to take the words of the Bible and make them mean something that fits the present, whatever present that was. And there's many beautiful examples of this in Rabbinic Judaism, where it says, the Bible says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you shall have no, I don't know the right English translation, but have no mercy, basically. And the rabbis say, well, that means money. And they explain how it means money. Or there's all these ways to take these Iron Age proclamations and make them fit into whatever, Middle Age and then modern age life. So Christian Zionism, as we've come to know it, begins really with the print revolution, with the Reformation. And the Reformation, what it basically means to many people, especially radical Reformationists, is there's no church that matters. It's me, myself, reading the Bible. I will read it, and it goes, all the priests and all the traditions in the middle are not relevant or don't really matter, because the Bible is a truth directly from God, and I can read it in my language, in my home, understand it as I please. So now I'm going to start trying. I have to tell you my confession. I'm not very good at all this Zoom things. I'm going to try to share my screen and show you some not very attractive slides that I have prepared. I am now screen sharing, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm screen sharing as it happens. This is not intentional, but my second to last slide of this presentation, which is almost the end. Okay. It's what we know today as the most sort of perhaps dangerous and organized form of Christian Zionism today. John Hagee, the head of Christians United for Israel, today, since October 7th, evermore, preaching that America must enter a war with Iran to hasten the second coming. Okay, so this is sort of, in a way, the end result of what I mean to show you. But we should really start here. Here, I said here. From the beginning. Okay, why is this not happening? Yeah, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. All right, that's okay. You can see the main thing, right? It's not really the way it's supposed to be, but that's fine. So this is the Geneva Bible, 1560, second, third generation of the Reformation, making illustrated version of the Bible in English by very extreme Protestants, Calvinists, that each person should be able to read the Bible. So there's a lot of explanations and diagrams, as you can see here, showing what Jerusalem looks like, what the temple looks like, what all the things the Bible. So people start reading this, and they realize something which most Christians did not realize for the previous 1560 years, which is the bulk of this book they call the Bible is about a people called Jews in a land called different names, Canaan, the Holy Land, Palestine, God's promises to them, their actions, their temple, their sacrifices. And in addition to all this, there's, of course, the New Testament. And in the New Testament, there's a book called Revelations. And Revelations talks about a second coming of Jesus and many dramatic events, which in the common understanding, take place in this country, in Palestine, Israel, and culminate in a huge war between the Jews and their enemies in this country. Sometimes we talk about Armageddon, is a place mentioned there. And this great war is everybody almost is going to die in it, and then there'll be a second coming of Jesus. So this is something literal that now has to happen. This becomes an obsession for many people who believe that the Bible is a literal word of God. And these people, in particular, I want to zoom in on the people who take this most seriously, the people who we know as the Puritans. Okay, the English people who take the Reformation to its sort of extreme. They produce a huge number of works in the 16th, 17th centuries about the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and the second coming of Jesus. One such bestseller, no way any of you could probably read this terrible font, but that's 1620's font for you, is The World's Great Restoration or Calling of the Jews. Basically, it's a book, bestseller, a British book from the 17th century about how the Jews are going to return to the Holy Land, accept Jesus, and the second coming will happen. A lot of people take this very, very seriously, and particularly they're very interested in the temple because there's a lot of prophecy in the Bible about the rebuilding of the Temple of Jerusalem. You hear that noise in the background. I'm going to have to move away. No, you don't hear it? Okay. All right. So, never mind. So you see this this is of course all handwritten and hand drawn because there's by a certain British intellectual, and it's about the Temple of Jerusalem and the measurements of the temple and the meaning of these measurements and all sorts of codes that are contained in this and the building of the temple as the end of all God's wishes for the world. Most of the people that I've shown in the slides in this presentation, I've also added their name. This one person, I haven't added their name because it's the only one I think maybe some of you will recognize, so it can be like a game. Who knows? Who is this person who was obsessed with the Temple of Jerusalem, who made all the diagrams of it, who calculated the measures of it over and over, and calculated, according to the Bible, very carefully the end times. Said Jerusalem would be rebuilt in the 19th century, the temple would be rebuilt in the end of the 20th or beginning of the 21st century, which is we're running out of time, and the war, this end of the world war, will be in 2060, more or less. This person you might recognize is Isaac Newton. Um, and he is but one of many British men of his age who is obsessed with these ideas. But I'm going to argue that this is not yet Christian Zionism because also there's Jews with ideas like this. They're reading the Bible, they're making calculations. Almost every important rabbi of the Middle Ages has some calculations about when the temple will rebuild and when the second coming will come, but they're not doing anything about it, right? Zionism is when you start to organize to do something about this, make this prophecy come true. And that, for that, you need another prerequisite. Okay, you need not only to believe that the Bible is a literal thing which should become true, but that it is your job and you have the power to do it. And for this next step, we need something quite impossible to happen, which is that this small, large, I know, island off the western coast of Europe comes to control the world, right? That the British become the British Empire. And suddenly they say, we know that this is what God wants, and it seems like we have the power to do it. So Christian Zionism needs this biblical belief, and it needs empire. And the British become an empire gradually without really noticing it, sort of. But they definitely notice it in 1815 when the Napoleonic Wars are over and Britain basically is the greatest naval power in the world and has no real opponents and seems like they can do whatever they please in whatever part of the world. And alongside that is born what I'm going to call the first Zionist movement, the first Zionist organization, which is officially known as the London Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews, which is founded actually a few years before the end of the Napoleonic War. It's founded in 1809, but it's foreshadowing. We're going towards this. And it still exists today. It's one of the 10 agencies of the Church of England. And one of its four stated goals is encouraging the physical restoration of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Right? Now, this is not just some bunch of, strange people. They are strange people in many ways, but they are strange people who happen to control the world. And this society comes to include many people who are pivotal in the British Empire, in the British elites. Notably, the person who was the head of the London Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews for many, many years. No, not this guy. This guy. The Lord Shaftesbury. The Lord Shaftesbury, a British politician and aristocrat and many other things, and very strong evangelical Christian, is obsessed with the idea of returning the Jews to the Holy Land. And he is, for many years, the head of the Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews, which is more colloquially known as the Jews Society or the Jewish Society, and is located, by the way, if anybody wants to find it, to this day in Palestine Place in London. So Shaftesbury is a member of parliament. He is a church leader. He is also, as it happens, the stepson, I guess is correct, of another British aristocrat. Can you guys read the quotes from this distance? Yeah. So I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but it's this. Like, I believe that the Jews need to return to Jerusalem, and this is our mission. And he spoke to his stepfather, the Lord Palmerston, who happened to be also the British Foreign Minister for many years and the British Prime Minister for about a decade. And so we have statements and a letter, actually a letter from the British, I think at the time he wrote it was Foreign Minister, but later also Prime Minister, to the Ottoman Sultan that says you should allow the Jews to settle in Palestine. Right? Palmerston himself is maybe not very interested in the Bible part of this, but his stepson very much is and is pressing him on it, and many other people are. Makes a political calculation that it's not a bad idea. And he writes to the South and says it's going to make you rich because the Jews have money. So you should allow them to settle in Palestine. It's going to be good for you. Here's the point of this, right? This is a letter from the head of the British government to the head of the Ottoman government proposing that the Jews be settled in Palestine long, long before there is a Jewish Zionist movement. And actually, another thing that's happening at this same time is that these people, the London Society for Promoting and others, are approaching Jews and telling them, look what we're going to do. We're going to bring the Jews to the Holy Land. It's great. We're going to you're going to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem. They talk a lot about the temple. And the Jews say, unanimously pretty much, overwhelmingly, like every Jewish leader, certainly every Jewish rabbi say, absolutely not. That is not what is going to happen. Sure, we believe that this will happen. This is prophecy, but we're absolutely forbidden by our rabbinic tradition from pursuing this as a political goal. Certainly starting wars over this. So I mentioned earlier that the rabbis have devised ways to make this Bible sort of abstract and not a practical thing to act by. Some of those ways are beautiful in like they're gains of logic. So one of my favorites is that in order to enter the Temple of Jerusalem, one had to be purified. In order to be purified, you needed priests to perform a certain ceremony in a certain spot on the Mount of Olives overlooking the temple using the ashes of a red heifer. Now, what is a red heifer? So it's a cow that has a reddish color. But the rabbis say, no, it's not just a cow that has a reddish color. It's a cow that every single hair on its body has this reddish color. And very easy examination will tell us there is no such cow in the world. There used to be such cows in the time of the temple, but they don't exist. So this whole thing, that's one of the many ways they say, really, this is never happening. This is not something that we're going to do. When God decides, then he'll send us priests and red heifers and all the things, but they make the rules in such a way to make the idea of actually doing this following religious law impossible. So the Christian Zionists are trying and the Jews are just not biting. Over and over again, they say, no, if you wanna, as do charity with Jews in Europe, or help Jews get settled in Britain, that's great. But no, this whole thing of helping us go to Jerusalem and build a temple, not so much. So Palmerston, as Prime Minister, and his stepson see that this is not happening. And they say, well, we need to missionize the Jews so that they believe in Jesus, so that, and there's an amazing amount, it's really unfathomable. If you look at evangelical Protestants, the amount of money and people that they spent in the 19th century trying to get Jews to become Christians, it's like more than they spent on all of Africa. it's ridiculous for a very small number of Jews because it was really, really important to them religiously that the Jews converting and accepting Jesus and returning to the Holy Land is. So one of the things they do, they appoint James Finn, this gentleman here with these wonderful whiskers. They make him the British consul. They open a consulate, first of all, in 1838, open a consulate in Jerusalem, and they make James Finn, who is a member of the Society for Promotion of Christianity Among the Jews, and maybe more importantly, his wife, Elizabeth Ann, who is an amazing figure in herself, and I don't have time right now to tell you about her, but did a lot of amazing stuff. These people actually together served as representatives in Jerusalem of both the British government and the Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews. And they started to do what we, Israelis, would call Tzionut Masit, practical Zionism, hands-on Zionism, building the Jewish state from the ground up. And they did a bunch of things. Really, we like, first of all, they built Christ Church in Jerusalem, which is a church which is all in Hebrew, all directed to Jews to get the Jews to join. And they made this scheme of getting the Jews of Jerusalem British citizenship and British protection and giving them health care and giving them all sorts of things and helping them. And this is really already what we would all identify as Zionism if it was not done by them. But I mean, what all Israelis would identify as Zionism if it was not done by them, which is build the first home outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem mission, and have a farm around it. And this home and this farm was all designed to get Jews out to work, to get Jews to work the land, to get Jews to connect to the land. They were working the land and reading the Bible, and they had a philosophy of productivism. They wanted to make the Jews productive again, to connect them to the land. They had many other such projects, also lobbying the Ottoman government, also buying land. Also, they had a problem, again, which is Jews weren't biting, is one. And two, that the Ottoman government was just not interested at all. Whatever Palmerston wrote and other British leaders wrote and said, we're going to give you money, Jews are going to give you money, it's going to be good for you, it's all sorts of things. The Ottoman Sultan said, absolutely not. I'm not having this European settlement in the middle of my empire that's maybe led by strange religious messianic. No, this is not happening. So the same people, um, the Lord Shaftesbury, who we saw earlier, and James Finn, and other Protestant leaders, Christian Zionist leaders, fund in 1865 the Palestine Exploration Fund, or PEF, which, again, this is something that Israelis would definitely identify as Zionism, mapping Palestine, researching its archaeology, looking for how we match the Bible to the archaeology. Um, it's a kind of mapping, a very exact mapping that is very much, as you can see here in their symbol, the surveyor, I don't know if you can see, is carrying a pistol. It's a sort of armed exploration that is quite clearly implied that it's actually a preparation for possibly conquering the country. Right? There's a quote here from a certain Bishop Thompson at the founding of the Palestine Exploration Fund. And he says, this country of Palestine belongs to you and me. It is essentially ours. It's not clear here exactly who this ours is, right? But basically, it's the believers in Jesus and it's the British. This country belongs to us. And we're exploring the land in preparation for taking it. Meanwhile, some Puritans didn't stay in England. Some Puritans went to New England. And the same ideas, Christian Zionist ideas, which I'm using Christian Zionism wrong, In the 19th century, the word Zionism doesn't exist. These people think of themselves not as Zionists, but as restorationists. They believe in the physical restoration of the Jews to the Holy Land. Right? Basically, the same thing, which would later be known as Zionism, but they're calling it restorationism. It is popular in British elites. It's popular in American elites in the same time. And towards the end of the 19th century is when the US also starts to understand that maybe it too is an empire. And that's when we start getting the organization of Christian Zionism, political Christian Zionism in the US. Right? So in 1891, William Blackstone, pictured here, who was a Chicago real estate mogul and evangelical Christian, and a very popular writer and speaker, issues the Blackstone's memorial, which says we should give Palestine to the Jews. Basically, it should be wrestled out of the hand of Turkey and should be given to the Jews because it belongs to them. Again, you might think, okay, this Mr. Blackstone, he's a guy in Chicago. Why is he historically important? But the Blackstone Memorial that he writes is signed by 451 people, including several justices of the Supreme Court and the head of the Supreme Court, several governors of states, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller. Like, it's not just 450 people who signed this. It's 450 people who have the power to influence US policy. It's presented to, I mean, maybe the least famous person of the people I've mentioned so far, American President Benjamin Harrison. It's presented to him. And basically, he signs, he says, great, but look, what is the US going to do about this? Right? Yes, it's a good idea, but not our job. Still, the main thrust of American policy is we're not involved in the Middle East right now. But actually, the Blackstone Memorial, as it's known, is represented by the same Blackstone and signed again by a huge range of American leaders in 19, like at the end of World War I. For the talks at the end of World War I, it's basically, it says, we, the US, should support the Balfour Declaration, should support the League of Nations giving this land, and that has an effect. That actually has a known political effect of making that basically happen. Meanwhile, this is 1891. Okay, we have the British Prime Minister, we have the US leadership and perhaps a president behind the idea of the Jews going to Palestine to make a Jewish state. Who we still don't have behind it is any Jews, or any significant number of Jews or any important Jews. Now enters this picture this man with the lovely beard, Mr. William Hechler. Hechler, no, I should say Hechler. Okay, he's a German, British, German, British, German. He is evangelical priest, a pastor. He was the tutor of the German royal family children, and not who became the Kaiser Wilhelm himself, but his cousins, and he knows the Kaiser Wilhelm. And Hechler is a very strong restorationist. And he's looking very hard all over Europe for Jews who will support this idea. In 1881, like the first proto-Zionist text that we learn in school is called Auto-Emancipation, was written by Leib Pinsker, a Jew, Leon Leib Pinsker in Odessa in 1881 or 82. Auto-emancipation talks about the Jews need a state, doesn't say Palestine, doesn't say land of Israel. So Pinsker actually thought maybe Argentina, maybe there was different plans that were on the table. But Hechler traveled to Odessa and he met with Pinsker and he told him, yes, a Jewish state, but it has to be in the land of Israel. And Pinsker said, also the rabbis tell us no, and also the Ottoman Empire is not interested. And Hechler told him, I have a letter. We'll never know actually if this was true, what Hechler said, that I have a letter from the Queen Victoria. And it says that the Queen Victoria wants the Sultan to give the Jews a state in Palestine. And so don't worry about the Ottomans not wanting because the British rule the world and Queen Victoria has signed this letter and you will have. And Pinskill basically publishes another paper, which is sort of second version of auto-emancipation, in which he says, and some basically, I'm paraphrasing, some say in Palestine, and if that's really practical, then great. Right? So the first sort of political statement of organized Jewish Zionism, we can directly link to Hechler coming to Pinskill and telling him, but still, most Jews are not into this. And Hechler writes his own book, The Restoration of the Jews, in 1884. Meanwhile, Hechler is the pastor of the British Embassy in Vienna in the 1890s, and there he meets a very important meeting. Actually, the quote on this slide is not from Hechler. It's a quote from Hechler's friend, whose picture I don't have here because he's not a Christian Zionist, Theodor Herzl. Right? So Theodor Herzl is a Viennese Jewish journalist, and he is worried about anti-Semitism. And he is approached by Hechler, and Hechler says, basically, this is an amazing, you need to make a Jewish state. And they form a relationship. Herzl wrote a lot. He wrote letters and diaries. He wrote a lot. The most often mentioned name in all the diaries of Theodor Herzl is William Hechler, who was the person who got him his meeting with the Kaiser famously. Was the person who got in connections with other royal houses. And he wrote a lot of stuff about Hechler. And I'm going to try to find something to read to you quickly that Herzl says about Hechler. It says, this man Hechler is a peculiar and complex person. There is much pedantry, exaggerated humility, pious eye-rolling about him. But he also gives me excellent advice, full of unmistakably genuine goodwill. He is at once clever and mystical, cunning and naive. In his dealings with me so far, he has supported me almost miraculously. His counsel and his precepts have been excellent to date. And unless it turns out later, somehow or other, that he is a double dealer, I would want the Jews to show him a full measure of gratitude. So Herzl says this person is very important in promoting the Zionist idea, and Jews should be grateful to him unless he's a double dealer, unless he's actually planning something else, which I'm going to say, of course, maybe not of course, Hechler is. Because Hechler knows something, or he thinks he knows something, that Newton knew, that all these Christian Zionists really knew all along, and that the religious Jews knew, that all of this was prophecy that was leading to a terrible, terrible war of the end of the world in which most of the Jews die. And that's why he can't get any Jews who have any Jewish education interested in this, because it's obviously a very dangerous proposition for Jews. But Herzl, who has no Jewish upbringing, who's a Jew like by ancestry, but is completely it doesn't have any of this context, and he doesn't really understand why Hechler is so actively supporting him. He's really all the time suspicious. Why is this happening? Meanwhile, another quote from Hechler, which is, it is wonderful how these Jews are unconsciously fulfilling the scriptures concerning the events which the prophets do tell us are to lead us to the Lord's second coming. And they are doing so just as unconsciously as their forefathers fulfilled God's prophecies when Christ came the first time and lived in Jerusalem. We are now seeing the stirring of the bones of Ezekiel. So Echel says it's amazing. This guy, he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know he's making biblical prophecy real. They're blindly going along with it, which, well, so basically, in a way, I've done the main thing, which I proposed to do, I think, which is to show that Christian Zionism long predates Jewish Zionism, that it has a part in enabling, making Jewish Zionism possible and starting it. It of course it keeps going, but like I could show you also slides of the Lord Balfour and David Lloyd George, who were in some way Christian Zionists, but also had other imperial calculations, who said, let's give Palestine to the Jews. Eventually, when they conquered it in 1917, most restorationists, in a way, thought that now their job was done. Right? The British have conquered this. They're gonna bring the Jews there. But then, at the end of the British mandate, after World War II, the British were leaving Palestine. There still wasn't a Jewish state. There was a sort of awakening of Christian Zionists, many people. One of those people, um, for some reason, always looks to me sort of German, but a certain kind of German, but is actually British, Indian-born, evangelical Christian, Ord Wingate, who is sent to this country as an intelligence officer to talk to Jews because he has some biblical education and some biblical Hebrew. But when he comes and he meets the leadership of the Jews in Palestine, he says to them, I'm not actually sent by the British government. I am sent by God to start the Jewish army and to bring about the coming of prophecy. And the Jewish leadership is very suspicious of him because he seems crazy. But he's also a very effective military counterinsurgency, very cruel and very effective organizer. Eventually, the Jews won't fund him, the British won't fund him, but the oil company does, British Petroleum, to secure a certain oil pipe, and he starts training Jewish elite fighters. And the people that he trains in his counterinsurgency techniques while he's giving them speeches about the Bible turn out to be the leadership of the Israeli army in the 1948 war. Um, Moshe Dayan, Yigal Allon, and others. Um, Wingate, in his dream, he was going to be commanding the Jewish army in the 1948 war, but he died in World War II. At a very young age, as Major General, he was very quickly promoted. He was a very effective military leader, but he didn't get to realize. But the people that he trained had a big part in forming the state of Israel and in what was the Nakba, in forcing out the Palestinian population, using a lot of the British colonial techniques that he had taught them. Um, so now we have the state of Israel sort of assured. The evangelicals sort of step back. And the evangelicals also have a constant discomfort with the state of Israel because it's not what was prophesied. It's not a kingdom. There's no priests. It's secular. It's maybe socialist. It's not exactly what we wanted. But in the US, there's an evangelical awakening around the 1967 war that says here is a prophecy taking shape even further. And this pulls in a lot of evangelicals to the idea that the prophecy is happening now. And the Israeli leadership following 1967 goes and meets, specifically Golda Meir, goes and meets a lot of American evangelical Christian leaders, and they vow their support to the state of Israel. And this becomes apparently very important in 1973, when Israel comes under surprise attack. And Golda Meir is calling Kissinger and Nixon and saying, you've got to get us arms, help us. And the story is that Nixon won't take her calls because the Jews didn't vote for Nixon. But so she calls Billy Graham, and this is like this happened. Billy Graham went to the White House to Nixon, who was his friend and who he helped get the evangelical vote, and told him, you need to send arms to Israel. And whether or not this is the reason, but within 24 hours, the US did. And allowed Israel to dramatically win that war. This tradition has grown since that time with the growing America-Israel alliance. There's also very much grown in these years the idea in the US that the US has taken on basically what the Puritans thought was England's historical role to make the biblical prophecy come true in Jerusalem. The evangelical Christians have gotten more and more organized in this direction. The moving of the US Embassy to Jerusalem is famously in 2018 uh, one of the demands that evangelicals made to join basically the Trump coalition, and was a realization of in 2006, one of these evangelical leaders, Mr. Hagee, I've actually heard his name pronounced like five different ways. But John Hagee of Texas, who's a televangelist who has many, many millions of viewers for his TV programs every week, was the first one to found a specifically Christian Zionist organization, or the first very big, specifically Christian Zionist organization in the US, Christians United for Israel. And Mr. Hagee is really very strongly believes that prophecy is coming true right now, and especially since October 7th, he's very strong on actually this quote: "The United States must join Israel in a preemptive military strike against Iran to fulfill God's plan," is 2008. Okay, it's not a new thing. As long as Netanyahu has been saying that they were one moment away from a terrible war with Iran, so has John Hagee, who is a friend also of Netanyahu personally. But especially these last 2 years, since October 7th, he has been talking about America needs to attack Iran, America needs to attack Iran. We know what happened in June, almost, sort of, but he wants it to happen again and bigger and more. And he's talking about this a lot recently. Like, you can find a lot of his videos online. This is something that's being pushed right now. Um, like, the two very important things for these prophecy-driven, it's Christian Zionists today, is that Israel doesn't leave the West Bank and settlements in the West Bank increase because this is a biblical Jewish land that the prophecy is about. It's not Tel Aviv. It's the hills of Judea and Samaria, and Jews need to be here to realize the biblical prophecy. This settlement in the West Bank and the rebuilding of the temple. Now, the other thing that has happened, which is, I've gone over the time really that I wanted to speak. I'm going to stop in a moment. The other thing that has happened is, which we didn't mention, is the Jewish Zionist movement. So the Jewish Zionist movement, we said, was invented in a way or pushed by Christian restorationists. But the Zionist movement originally thought that it was a secular movement, just looking to make a safe place for the Jews. And Herzl said maybe Uganda, maybe this, but the land of Israel, because the biblical history and because Britain supports it. And Britain now rules the land of Israel since 1917, so we'll take the land of Israel. But there's been a process of the secular Zionists first internalizing this idea of biblical prophecy, expressed like in the David Ben-Gurion, who knew the Bible off by heart, was constantly quoting the Bible, was obsessed with biblical place names and biblical locations, who famously said, "This book is our deed of ownership to this land," which was strange because he was a secular socialist. Like the sort of famous paraphrase of Ben-Gurion is, "There is no God and he promised us this land." Right? So there was a problem there, but eventually all of this gave birth to what we call religious Jewish Zionism, or just religious Zionism, which in the beginning, the Zionist movement was secular and was anti-religious, and the religious Jews were anti-Zionist. But as the state grew and grew in power, there grew this new movement of religious Zionists, and they increasingly are linking themselves to the evangelical Christians because they see the power that they have to move things in the American government, in raising money, and the Christian Zionists love them because, like, one of the most common critiques you'll find, all right, if you start looking, don't, but at Christian Zionist message boards and internet discussions and questions that they ask their speakers after, you say that the state of Israel is prophecy, but the state of Israel has gay rights, and it's all secular, and it's like, how can we support if we're the American conservatives the state of Israel has abortions? Abortions are perfectly legal in the state of Israel. How can we as evangelical Christians support this? So they're uncomfortable with the sort of mainstream state of Israel, and they're much more comfortable with the religious Zionists who share many of their views. And they've been working in closer and closer coalition, especially Mr. Hagee, who's sending volunteers to the hardcore religious settlements of the West Bank. And one of the things that they did and I'm going to really finish with this last slide. This is maybe the most important person of this whole presentation, is the red heifer. So I told you the rabbis made this rule, said the red heifer has to have every hair of its body red, and that's not a really possible thing. So basically give up on this temple thing. Some of Hege's followers, the Texan ranchers, made it their life's work to produce a red heifer. And they produced five that have passed all the rabbinic tests. And they transported them to Israel in 2022. They're in a place called Tel Shiloh, in the middle of the West Bank, in the middle of Samaria. That you can go and see them. You can buy a ticket and see the red heifers, all ready uh, to be sacrificed by priests. And the Temple Institute in Jerusalem has a priest trains and has a knives and has the cloves, and they know which spot it is on the Mount of Olives, which has to be overlooking. They need to burn a cow, make the ashes, then they can put those ashes on themselves and friends, and then they can walk to the right place to rebuild the temple. And they couldn't do this without the good help of the Texas ranchers, and Mr. Hege's followers. So yeah, I think we'll now stop me talking for a bit. Erez, have you seen any good questions?
There have been a few questions, but firstly, thank you, Yahav. So important to understand the ways that the modern political movement of Zionism was constructed and what its roots are in Christian and imperial history and in Britain. The first question that I saw come up was about different Christian sects and denominations and orientations. So non-evangelicals, or what do other communities? The question in specific in the chat was around Catholics, Roman Catholics.
Okay,
I was wondering
right.
if you could share anything more about that.
Okay. So that's a big question because there's like 2 billion Christians. But about 1 billion of those 2 billion are Catholics. And traditionally, mostly, it's starting to change a little bit at the edges, but they are not at all Zionists, right? So the Catholic Church does not say everybody reads the Bible themselves. There is a church tradition, and that church tradition says everywhere that it says Israel or the seed of Israel means the people who follow or believe in Jesus. They're the ones who all the promises are made to. There is no more promise to a national or ethnic or genetic Jewish people. This is a thing of the past, and you don't read it that way. And anyway, you don't read these things that literally. So that's Catholics. The other thing to say is the other billion or so Christians, um, a huge number of them are today one or another kind of Christian Zionists. Not a majority, but a very big number, an unknown very big number. Tens of millions in the US, but probably hundreds of millions around the world. The vast majority of these people today, especially those outside the US, are not exactly what I've been talking about now. They're not talking about the end times so much. They're not talking about the rebuilding of the temple. Just as there are many Jewish Zionists, some of them are liberal Zionists, and some of them are. There's many people today, especially in what we used to call the third world, the global south. There's a lot of people today who are various kinds of renewalists and Pentecostalists, and they support Israel. Usually they will tell you because the Bible says, those who bless Israel, I will bless. So it's part of a sort of, what should we call it? There's a name for it. There's a theology that says, if you're good, you'll have more things, basically. I forget the right word. But there is such an idea, and increasingly for many people, with a lot of American evangelical influence, it's this idea that supporting Israel, like if Brazilian or Nigerian or Samoan, which Samoa just announced it's moving its embassy to Jerusalem, Samoan Christians support Israel, then God will support Samoa or Brazil or Nigeria or whatever. And they're not thinking so much of the end times and this. They just support Israel. They think it's a nice thing that Jews have a state in the Holy Land. There's many, many of those who are not like this Hege and Kufi. Hege just only has about 10 million members in Kufi, who only raise about $100 million a year estimated. But in American politics, that's the right place. That is a lot. That can be enough to push for a war in Iran at a certain moment or for whatever changes in policy. So the number of people who might generally identify as Christian Zionists is much bigger. These people that I'm talking about, the end times driven evangelicals, they're a smaller number, but they're very well organized and motivated and funded.
Thanks, Yahav. Um, Also important, and I think a through line in all of what we've heard today is the ways that it's important to grapple with the ways that both today and historically, Zionism is not primarily or is not exclusively or even primarily a Jewish movement, but a Christian and British Western uh, movement. I guess I wanted to ask you myself, what specifically in the last years led you to begin? You called it a hole earlier. I'm curious, what in this specific period drew you towards it, or what was the beginning of this discussion, and what do you think is important?
All
In
right. So, I mean, I could give you like, there's a bunch of different circumstances that happened together. I moved to here, we're neighbors, Erez and I live a few streets away. And I moved here to a street called Oliphant Street. It's Lawrence Oliphant is an amazing character. I didn't mention it all today. There's so many important Christian Zionists I didn't mention today. I just was bored when I started reading about Lawrence Oliphant, and then that's one way I got into this. But another thing is that we've been looking at the images from Gaza, also the war with Iran, also, and it's been disheartening, is a polite way to say it. And one of the questions it led me to is like, is this fated? That is the idea of making a Jewish state in the land of Israel inevitably leading towards some sort of apocalyptic war because, you can't make an ethno state in a place where the other people are not of that ethnos without some sort of um, genocide or whatever. It's like how did anybody think that this was going to work, right? And that got me thinking about how it all began. And so there's, one of the versions that I would tell people, like, tell the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One is like a man jumps out of a burning building, lands on top of another man, a fight ensues. Right? So the Jews were fleeing the pogroms, were fleeing Europe. They just needed a place to jump to, and they landed on the Palestinians who were just there, and nobody meant it, right? They just needed a place, and they were already there. And so but then, how did you not see that, right? When you were jumping, you knew that they were there. What did you think was going to happen? And the more I looked at it, the more I saw that really this idea was being pushed for a long time, and Jews were saying, no. Jews were saying, this is a bad idea. Let's go to Argentina. Let's go to America. Let's go to, parentheses, not trying to offend anybody, where successful genocides have already been committed and the native populations are already destroyed, and we can settle in Argentina or in Australia or in North America without displacing anybody, or so we imagine, and not start a terrible war and not try to realize biblical prophecy, which is we don't want actually priests in a temple and all this stuff. So that really it couldn't happen without evangelical Protestants who knew or imagined from the beginning that this was about leading towards an apocalyptic war, pushing this.
fair, important context and perspective. I think the last question we have time for that I saw asked towards the start was around any organizing that's happening against Christian Zionism or different avenues for it that you think are interesting. Curious if you have any thoughts there or around specific ways to oppose Christians United for Israel and the United States or this larger formation that exists.
Right. So, of course, soon I'm gonna throw that question back to you, Erez, and have you talk about Green Olive's efforts in this vein. But I also want to tell you a thought which is less directly practical than what Green Olive is doing, which is telling this story in this way that I've told you it today is one of many alternative ways of telling the same story, right? It's on the face of it not more or less valid than the story I learned in school about the Jews founding Zionism. Or my strange thinking, perhaps, is that the only reason to tell history is because of our interest in the future, right? It doesn't really matter what happened in 1830 in Palestine Place unless we take from it something for the future. And I think I propose that telling the story more or less the way I told it now, which is a little bit conspiratorial, right? The evangelicals knew from the beginning this was going towards apocalypse, and they not only they don't care, they want it to happen. And so they say, we support Jews, you should be safe. And they create this very dangerous situation. The reason that this is important to tell is because if we accept some version of this, then we can perhaps unite some forces of, let's say, secular Jews, non-evangelical Christian Americans, Palestinians, to say, let's think of if this from the beginning was a trap, let's think our way out of it together. Because we don't want apocalypse. These people want apocalypse, whether they're Kufi, Christians United for Israel, or whether there is this certain section of religious Zionists in Israel. They're not 10% of, there may be 10% of Americans, there may be 10% of Israelis. They're sort of pulling us all in their direction because we don't have enough direction, or because they're so determined, or because God is whispering in their ear, or because whatever reason. But if we see this together happening, and we see that we're being led into something that is not good for anybody who doesn't believe that God is going to intervene personally in history and save them at the last moment by rapturing them before it all burns down, then we have like a story that we can organize against together.
Beautiful. And with that, unfortunately, I think we're out of time today, unless you have a final thought to end on. But I think that final note of together thinking our way into a different reality and a different framework for the future is a good one that we appreciate your helping us to continue embarking on today. And I think for me personally, and I think for all of us, something that's particularly important in learning about the history of Christian Zionism and restorationism and the ways it's linked to British statecraft in the 1800s is that in order to dismantle occupation and displacement and military rule and larger structures of geopolitical domination and investment in the current reality here that's playing out, we have to understand its origins, we have to understand its underlying logic if we're going to undo them and remake the work, this context and the future into something else. So deeply appreciated. And as Yahav mentioned, the Green Olive Collective has been part with other organizations of a campaign over the last months to rehabilitate olive orchards and replant olive trees destroyed by settlers, and also specifically destroyed by Hayovel, a Christian Zionist organization that brings people like the Texas ranchers Yahav alluded to volunteer on settlements like Yitzhar and Hagwacha in the northern West Bank and directly participate in projects that expropriate Palestinian lands, participate in settlement tree planting efforts. So we are in the next week concluding that effort, but we will continue going forward to work with the Boolean Land and Farming Cooperative, with agricultural communities in Masafa Yatta and elsewhere to counter the efforts of Hayovel and Christian Zionist organizations, along with settlement councils and the constellation of organizations that support expropriation on the ground. So stay tuned for updates. And with that, I just want to thank everyone here on behalf of the Green Olive Collective for joining from around the world. And thank you, Yahav, again for your time. It's really
Thank
appreciated.
you. Thank you so much, Erez, for organizing this and narrating and organizing and making it happen. And thank you so much, all of you. Yeah, I don't know how you do that, sending the hearts and waves, but I see them and I'm sending them back to all of you.
I also don't know how to do the hearts and waves. It's impressive. Um, so very lastly, I'll close just by saying that, as I mentioned at the start of our time, contributions for today's event will support our work, like the Sowing Solidarity campaign, to challenge policies of forced transfer, displacement, and military occupation. They will help us to sustain grassroots initiatives with Palestinian communities and human rights defenders on the ground, including the replanting of olive trees, rebuilding homes after demolitions, and cultivating lands threatened with expropriation. Here again is all the relevant links and information if you want to learn more and find different ways to become involved. You are also invited to join the Green Olive Solidarity Network. In this time of course, ongoing devastation, it's often hard to know how we can express our solidarity and tangibly support Palestinians. And that's why we've launched this advocacy and mutual aid network that allows people around the world to maintain direct and sustained connections with Palestinians on the ground. Lastly, anyone who wants to join the Green Olive Collective and with Yahav on the ground and meet with community advocates in the West Bank and human rights defenders throughout the region is welcome to join our upcoming solidarity missions and tours. You can find out more at greenolivetours.com about our different destinations and itineraries, including Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nablus, and beyond. And with that, I'll finish and say that I hope everyone here has good and lovely days, and we'll see you very soon for upcoming webinars and events and calls to action that will be sent out. Thanks again. We'll send the recording out tomorrow, and have good days, everyone.